Hello guys, today we're going to be doing a video on Spider-Man Remastered using a variety of GPUs. This is going to be the final video I'm going to be doing on Spider-Man. I'm going to be going through every other GPU that I haven't tested yet and put it all into one video. We're going to be starting it off with the GTX 750 Ti, and we're going to be playing the game at 1080p on the very low settings. Now I'm not going to be spending too much time on those higher presets since we are already struggling without FSR. To run the game, so I'll go ahead and try it very low, maybe medium as well, and then I'll do an optimized preset as well for this card. And thank you guys for the recent support. We actually hit 1,000 subs yesterday, which is insane. So I want to go ahead and thank everyone who did sub and everyone who does watch the content. Appreciate you guys a lot. Alright, as you can see on the very low settings, 1080p, we are getting 20 FPS while swinging around. We can hit 30 in some areas, but this is quite choppy at this point. It's very unplayable, and once you get on foot, it's way more reasonable. We're getting 25 to almost 30 FPS, but still not the best experience. But luckily we do have FSR 2.0 with this game, which is a savior for these older cards. Alright, starting it off with FSR 2.0 using the quality preset. It does look pretty good. We do get some slight blurring in the distance and on the cars, but for the most part this does look really good. And FPS is doing much better as well. We're getting 30 FPS, a 30 FPS lock pretty much. We will still get those dips into the high 20s, but we are spending way more time in the 30s now instead of the low 20s, which is way better. And actually swinging around, we do get those dips still into the 20s, but it does feel way better, I will say. But it's still very inconsistent. But we're playing at 900p now instead of 1080p, so slightly lower resolution. But FPS is in the 40s now. The low 40s, but it's a 10 FPS increase from what we had before. We're going to go ahead and swing and see if we get those massive dips into the 20s, which we haven't yet, which is really nice. And this gives us a little bit extra headroom to play on those, on slightly increased graphical settings, because the problem with the very low settings is that it has heaps of pop-in, and some textures do look quite blurry, but still very playable at 30 to 40 FPS. The lowest we've seen it is 32 FPS. And the highest is like 45, so. And I increased the graphical settings. Texture quality is set to medium, and at level of detail set to low, and everything else is set to very low. We are getting a consistent 30 with minor dips into the high 20s. Ideally you want to play this at 1080p, but unfortunately we couldn't. We had pretty massive dips into the 20s, which made it pretty unplayable, even on the very low settings with FSR. So at 900p gives us a little bit extra headroom to have a consistent 30. It's not perfect, but it's a very playable experience and lets you play Spider-Man. Alright, let's go and move up to the next GPU, which is the GTX 1060. We are playing with the low preset. It's running so smooth right now. Let's go and show you guys the settings. 1080p. We can turn this off actually, that's not good. TAA will enable, and low preset. Camera effects will turn these off. Looking good. Field of view is reset as well. There we go. Seems like we're getting 60 FPS going here with the low preset, which is not good to be honest. I think us to be able to play this at medium or high at 60 with this card, but playing at low settings 1080p, and we're getting 60 to 70 FPS so far. We can obviously go ahead and optimize the settings to make it look better while running great as well, but going strictly off the presets alone, it's not looking good right now. Alright, we moved up to the medium preset now. I had to restart the game because it freezes on me when I change the presets. And yeah, let's jump into it. See what we can get. So far it's looking pretty good. We're getting 60 FPS still. 60 to 70 FPS. Cars look a bit blurry, but other than that, it looks good. Not stuttering at all. Gonna drop down real quick, see what the cars look like. Alright, 70 FPS while on the ground. The park seems to be the most intensive areas that I've actually seen in the city. With every other preset, you always get a pretty decent FPS dip. Alright, using the high preset now, let's go ahead and show the settings off. There we go. Basically the same performance as what we had before. Let's go ahead and start swinging. That normally gives us a decent FPS dip. We are basically holding 60, and then in those more intensive scenes, we're going to fall down into the 50s. Which is unfortunate, but we do have FSR available to us as well, so we could go ahead and use... Oh, there's a car crash there. We do have FSR as well. Like right here, we're getting 40 FPS at the park. Wow, that's very choppy. since we know we can actually fall down into the 40s, let's go ahead and use FSR. Set it up to quality to start it off. And we are getting 60 FPS at the park, which is what we want. And one more thing I forgot to mention is that when we were playing on the low settings, we were using up 4.5 gigs of VRAM, which means if you're running the 3GB version of the 1060, you might be running into some issues with these high presets especially. Alright, jumping up to the RTX 2070 now, playing on the low preset, 1080p. And at this park we were sitting at 140 FPS beforehand, but as I actually arrived at the park, we dropped down to the 90s. So we're actually averaging around 120 to 130 FPS, and in those easier scenes we get 150 FPS, and in those more intensive scenes we get 90 FPS. So it's a big range, but still way above 60. And we can obviously go ahead and play on medium or high preset without any issue at 1080p anyway. I might try at 1440p and 4K as well, just to show how this card runs it. Alright, so I decided to go ahead and skip medium preset since we were getting such good frames on low settings. There was really no point in us trying out medium settings. From the previous tests that I've done with the other cards, the low and medium settings are very similar, but the high and the very high preset are more intensive, getting 80 FPS on our lowest, and 76 FPS, and our highest is like 110, I think. It's over 100, which is more than enough for this kind of game. 1440p, we're getting 90 FPS still. But GPU's fully maxed out now, whereas before we were sitting in the 80s, I believe. So, looking good. FPS is at 70 near the park, and then once we leave the park, we go up to 80 to 90 FPS. We haven't hit 90 yet, but we got pretty close to it. We do have DLSS available to us as well, but we don't really need it. We're still getting way above 60. In those more intensive scenes, we do drop down into the 70s, but even then, we're still doing fine. Right, playing at 4K now. This looks so crystal clear. It's crazy. We're getting 50 FPS at the park. We drop down into the mid 40s as well. But honestly, it doesn't feel laggy at all. It feels very smooth still. There's no stuttering or lag spikes, but we can't hold 60 FPS at 4K high. We are getting 60 FPS on average, but once we go to the park, we do fall down into the mid to high 50s. The low 50s into the 40s even, actually. Alright, jumping to our final GPU, the RTX 3050. We're going to be starting it off with 1080p on the low preset. Now obviously the 3050 is a weaker card compared to the 2070. So FPS is going to be a little bit lower than what we got with the 2070, but we should still be able to play this game at the high preset at 1080p at least. Anyway. And we're getting 80 FPS, so a 10 FPS decrease from what we had before. Not bad at all. And then dropping down to the floor, what do we get? Around 110 FPS. Now playing with the high preset, getting 70 FPS at the park and almost 90 FPS while swinging around. It's not bad at all. We're getting 50 FPS playing at 1440p, high preset. So unfortunately we can't hold a steady 60 with this. But we do have DLSS available to us as well, so we can obviously use that to bring us back up to 60. Using the Quality DLSS, we gained 20 FPS, 20 to 30 FPS, which is incredible. Gives us way more headroom to be able to play this game at the high preset. Now, highest frame rate that I've seen with this is 90 FPS with DLSS, and lowest was 65, I believe, so it's way more than enough for you to have a good experience with this game. Playing at 4K now though, very close to the 30s though. We were very close to the low 30s though. Swinging around the park real quick. Sitting at 35 FPS on average. Now using Quality DLSS, FPS is in the 40s, so not too much of an increase to be honest. We're getting way more at 1080p compared to 4K. So we can't hit 60 at 4K high, unfortunately. We can increase our DLSS setting to balance the performance mode, but you might be cutting into some quality at that point. Using the Balance DLSS, we are still sitting in the 40s. So not much of an increase. We gained like 5 FPS on our top end, but we're still sitting in the 40s. Can't even hit 50 yet. But the game still does look really good. Can't really see any blurriness. The game still looks very sharp. Now playing with Performance DLSS, the game still does look really good. Can't really complain about this at all. Looks very sharp, surprisingly. But FPS is still in the 40s, the low 40s even. So I don't know what's going on here. Not really giving us increase in performance. That's it for the video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully you found it useful. If you did, give it a like. And sub the channel we have as well. Alright, see you next time.